Hey, thank you so much for coming. You are definitely in the place to be. I'd like to thank Elizabeth for that introduction, and also thank the team here at MoAD for making this event possible. You know, I'm energized by the opportunity to be the Cultural Critic in Residence, and this is our final program of the year. This has been an illustrious launch to this residency, and I'm just thrilled to be able to end with this particular film. A cultural critic is one who examines the traditional list or canon of artistic works that are considered to be permanently established as a part of the highest order, right? And through critical examination, my aim is to develop an analysis of the broader society as a whole. Notable examples of cultural critics include folks like James Baldwin, Susan Sontag, Bell Hooks, and of course the incomparable Toni Morrison. Now, my work really centralizes the cultural politics of film. Thinking about Black cinema as a launching pad for having critical conversations, really making critical connections to larger issues and forces that lie at the intersections of race, history, politics, and economics. And through these events that I've been curating here over the past year and will continue to do next year, what I'm aiming to do is to question how we as a people encounter these issues and forces as a part of our politics of the everyday. Now, our program tonight, Black Is, Black Ain't, celebrating the 15th anniversary of Medicine for Melancholy, which is directed by Barry Jenkins, is in fact a celebration. And what I learned yesterday is actually that this celebration comes on the heels of the 18th anniversary of MoAD itself, right? That's synergy. You couldn't have scripted that any better. So the 15th anniversary of the film and then the 18th anniversary of the museum, where a portion of the film was actually shot here in the museum. So just thinking about the first time I encountered this movie, I remember the feeling like it was yesterday. I stumbled upon this DVD in the library in Burbank, just outside of Hollywood. And I hadn't heard anything about the movie. I didn't know any of the actors. I didn't know any of the directors. I just picked up this DVD. I saw the cover. You know how it is. And I'm looking at this DVD and I'm like, okay, this looks interesting. Let me grab it. And I took it home and I watched. And as the final credits rolled at the end of the film, I remember this sensation coming over me. It was so unique. It was such a unique experience because I had never seen anything like this before. I was like, okay, wait, what just happened to me? What did I just watch? It was beautiful. It was quiet. It was slow. It felt random, but yet urgent at the same time. It felt real and authentic to a particular moment. But I don't believe that at the time I had the language, the critical language, or the cinematic vocabulary to really understand what I had just witnessed, or to completely articulate my thoughts about why this movie jolted me with this energy. All I knew was this movie was good. That was the only thing I could say. I was like, this good. This was a time before, I even knew that there was a thing called film school, right? Growing up in Chicago, that was not within the realm of plausibility for me. I didn't know that you could go to a place and actually learn how to study movies and learn how to make movies. So I would just go to the library, like I said, in Burbank, and I would grab copious books and DVDs. And what I realized now is unwittingly what I was actually engaged in this process of becoming an autodidact. Like I was educating myself, right? Watching classic films, reading about that, but taking on an informal education of film and visual culture. And now that I think about it, what I realized, if I could crystallize into one word what it was that I felt watching that film, that one word would be, I felt seen. S-E-E-N, not S-C. You feel me? Seen. Right? I felt seen. The film made me feel seen. I felt that the peculiar alienation of being young, being black, in the city, being socially conscious and aware was somehow made more bearable by viewing this film, by viewing this artistic work. And this was the first time in my adult life that I can recall actually seeing characters on the screen that felt so familiar to me. These were people who could have been my friends. These were people who were like me. They were doing things that I would have done with my friends. They were going places. They was riding bikes. They was cracking jokes. They was sipping wine, you know. And this was the first time as an adult in the 21st century that I felt like I was seeing myself on screen, that I was seeing a reflection of my own life. And the question becomes, why does that even matter? Why is that even important? Well, representation matters beyond the obvious reasons, but it matters even more so because the human experience necessitates it. The human experience necessitates storytelling as a vital component of human survival. I'm reminded of the words of James Baldwin, where he actually writes in his book in 1976, Devil Finds Work, where he writes, in order for a person to bear his or her life, that he or she needs to have a valid recreation of that life. Oh, marinate on that one. Oh, man. No. What Baldwin is actually arguing for is for us to recognize the importance of film, particularly storytelling in film, and the role that this plays in our lives. In other words, how movies make magic, but that magic helps us understand who we are. And it would also help us understand who we are not. And even more so, what this does, in a way, is it helps us bear the weight of our condition. Now, little did I know that 10 years later, I would be devoting the next 12 years of my life studying formally in some of the nation's top, university film programs, where I would become encountered the rich and long and hidden traditions of Black independent cinema. And I became fascinated with the voices that I was encountering. I'm talking about Melvin Van Peebles. I'm talking about Charles Burnett, Julie Dash, Billy Woodbury, Marlon Riggs, Haile Garima, Wendell Harris Jr., among many others. And so when most people think about Barry Jenkins, the first thing they think about is Moonlight. Right? Is that what most people, that's what I think. When people think, because he won an Oscar, right, for the adapted screenplay. So when the first thing people think about with Barry Jenkins, oh yeah, Moonlight. Not me. The first thing I think about with Barry Jenkins is Medicine for Melancholy. It's his first film. It was shot here in San Francisco. It was shot here in the museum in a world that existed before Uber. A world before Facebook, Twitter or Instagram, Snapchat or Discord. This was the world of MySpace. Right? MySpace was all the rage in terms of popular culture and social media, and everybody had a friend named Tom. What Medicine for Melancholy does is it offers us a glimpse into a Black world that we hadn't seen on screen before. This was a world of indie, black, bohemian, millennials in a pre-Obama America. Come on now. Yeah. Yeah. This was a world before the Obama administration. And at the same time, the film was a romance between these two characters and between the city itself. But in many ways, I think this film is a social document of a city in transformation. A city that is the source of life and tension. This film is about black beauty, about black joy and laughter, black intimacy, coupled with loneliness and alienation. Because all of that is burgeoning beneath the surface of this meditation on what I would describe as alternative blackness. This film presents characters who have a connection, right? But it's complicated, and they share different worldviews. They're two flawed human beings, and that's okay. And they're filled with emotion, they're filled with attraction, they're filled with rage and contradiction regarding their romantic relation and regarding the overwhelming gentrification of San Francisco. So to place these two characters in this film during this time, what it does is it reinforces the friction that they feel within this environment because they can't help but stand out because they do not quite fit in. Their incongruity makes their romance doomed from the beginning. And the more they try, the more truth is revealed, and the more the audience is forced to remove the wool from our eyes. And we actually start to bear witness to something really interesting. And that is the fact that capitalism is in fact a zero-sum game. And what that means is there will always be, in terms of capitalism as our system of American reality, there will always be somebody getting exploited and someone else gaining from that exploitation. But the quiet strength of Medicine for Melancholy stands out as ambitious and poignant, compassionate and intentional, not intending to provide any broad answers, but intent on asking the right hard questions. And what it does, the film itself, is render the beauty of blackness visible in all of its variations and in all of its different forms. And that's why I love this movie. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce our guest this evening, Hana Baba. Hana is a radio journalist. She is the longtime host of Crosscurrents, the daily news magazine on NPR Station KALW here in San Francisco. She is a Sudanese American. Hana enjoys exploring cultural intersections and immigrant and diaspora life. She is also a creator and host of the award-winning podcast, The Stoop, telling stories from across the Black diaspora. Her work appears on public radio programs on NPR, The World, and the BBC. Everyone, please join me in welcoming to the stage, Hana Baba. Thank you.
Am I here?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Quite an introduction, Dr. Great.
Hey, listen, you know what time it is. So, man, thank you so much for being here tonight with us to engage in this illustrious conversation about what I feel is this very important film that remains, in many regards, critically underseen, critically underappreciated in some ways. And we want to just unpack all of it and talk about everything and our relationship to this film and why it's important. And I just want to say welcome to the stage.
Thank you. I mean, you said it all. We could have gone home after that amazing speech. And because my first question, I guess, to you, we're just here to have a conversation, right? Like, I'm not here as my interviewer self.
which is dope anyway.
We're just talking today, but if you, like, in a nutshell, why did you want to celebrate this film 15 years later?
Right. Well, I think what makes the film important is how it engages in the representational politics of Blackness. The film is, and I always point this out because I think it's important from a kind of a production history point of view. This is the only film that Barry Jenkins has directed that he actually wrote the original screenplay. Right? And what that does, well, what does that mean? All the other films, Moonlight, If Beale Street Could Talk, right? These are all adaptations of other works by other authors. Moonlight is Terrell Alvin McCraney, and then obviously Baldwin, Beale Street. But Medicine for Melancholy is actually written by Barry Jenkins. Mm-hmm. And what that does as a creator, as a director, in terms of what the film, how it functions, is it makes the film very personal. Right. Very, very real. He's bringing an aspect of himself to the film that like is not quite story. There. Yeah, his story. His story. Exactly. Mm-hmm. Now, people make the argument, right? Well, Moonlight is kind of his story too. He's from Miami, et cetera, but that, I think, is an access point that allowed him to be able to tell that story, but that's not his story. That's the story of McCraney.
And that alone is worthy of celebration.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so the way that the film engages in representational politics, it does so in a way that it depicts what I would describe as alternative Blackness. And I was thinking about this last night.
What I would just call different kinds of Black.
That's what I mean.
Okay, you just say it fancy, no, like an academic, like.
I'm kind of fancy. I'm kind of fancy. But what makes it so interesting in terms of why I call it alternative Blackness is because I'm thinking about the history of cinematic representation. And if you want to talk about historically, in terms of cinema, how Blackness has been rendered on screen, it's not like this. And that's what makes this alternative. Well, what am I saying? I'm talking about what this film does is it depicts a multiplicity of Blackness, right? Variations of Blackness. Black folks, like I said, that looked like and did things that were very familiar to me. And I had never seen anything like that before. And what I think the film was actually saying in a lot of ways was that it's okay to be different. There's not one way to be Black in America. And I think the film
Black is not a monolith.
That. Exactly. Mm-hmm. It's not a monolith. Blackness,
and I think people could relate. I bet there's a good chunk of people who could relate to Micah and a good chunk of people who could relate to Jo. And that's exactly what you're saying.
No, it is, because these characters aren't, scratching and surviving. They not, mopping floors or dodging bullets in the inner city.
Does everybody know the reference, scratching and surviving? No, hanging in a child line.
Good time.
Good time. Okay.
No, it's true.
It's a different generation.
No, it's true. They got YouTube and all kind of stuff. It's so funny because all my students always be like, I wish I was growing up in that time. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. But the point is that these characters and the way that Blackness has been traditionally rendered, particularly on the dominant stage or the dominant screen, is either, you're either a saint or a monster. It's no room in between. No, it's just like you either the magical Negro, you the saint, you Bagger Van, the legend of Bagger Vance, or, you King Kong ain't got nothing on me. Denzel Washington.
There's no nuance.
No, at all. Mm-hmm. And what this film does is it presents that nuance. It offers the spectator, it offers the audience this very real access point into a window of reality that had heretofore been absent from the screen.
Okay, so we're going to step back a little bit because I want to talk about one of the first things that struck me as I watched this film, which was just the visual style of the film, right? The cinematography, the use of color or lack thereof. I wanted to talk to you as a scholar of film. How does this visual aesthetic contribute to the storytelling or the emotional impact of the film? I'm reminded of Schindler's List a little bit too when I watch this movie, with that, the black and white, and sometimes you see red. So what does that do?
Okay. Yeah. So it does a lot. It's important to contextualize this time period, right? We're talking about late in the first decade of the 2000s. So this movie was shot in 2007, and it came out 2008, 2009, slowly. But during this time period, you got to think, okay, what's going on in terms of the broader cinematic milieu? And in terms of like how Blackness is being represented at this point, it's just Tyler Perry. Right? So all of that hope and all of the aspirations that we had from the 90s black film movement was gone. It had been completely halted. I'm talking about, let's take a little journey, right? Waiting to Exhale, Love Jones. This film, right, Love Jones, is the predecessor to this movie.
Soul Food. Soul Food.
There's Devil in the Blue Dress with Denzel. There's Baby Kids. Y'all don't remember that animated film, Baby Kids? There were a wide range, a variety of films that were being made that had nuance in the 1990s. But by the time we get to the new millennium, that energy, that momentum is completely halted.
What happened? Is that a whole other event we need to?
No, well, in many ways it is. But what happens is 9/11. 9/11 happens. And so you got to understand, like, in terms of Hollywood cinema, as we understand it, the dominant cinema, black film was already marginalized in the first place. But by the time we get to 2001, the industry and the establishment coalesce to create films to drum up support for the war. So what happens is, now this is so deep because people try to like divorce, or they aren't aware of the intimate connections between the politics of the governance, the establishment, and the Hollywood system itself. Like, there's very little separation. I write about in the book how the CIA has offices in Hollywood. Why does the CIA have a Hollywood liaison? I'm being real. And so what happens is the industry needs to drum up support for the war, the same thing they did during World War II. And so what ends up happening is black cinema falls to the wayside, and you start to see all of this uptick in like this war film cycle. Tears of a Son, The Gladiator,
The Patriot?
No. The one with Pearl Harbor, The Pianist. All this come out. Google it. All this come out in like 2001, 2002. I mean, like immediately. Like they had the movies ready. And no, I'm keeping it real. So what happens is, in terms of black cinematic visibility, we become rendered invisible. And that creates a lane for Tyler Perry, who had already made $100 million off them plays. He had already made 100. So when he went to It's like, look, he got the Master P deal. I just, look, I put up my own money, just give me the distribution deal.
Okay.
But at the same time, what happens is there's an independent film movement that's burgeoning, but it's completely white. And this independent film movement is like driven by young white filmmakers who are in their 20s. And they're making films with their friends, and they're shooting these films on like prosumer cameras, like HVX 200, and they're making these movies in their apartments. And this creates this kind of ripple effect that later becomes known as mumblecore. The mumblecore movement. I'm talking about people like the Duplass brothers, Mark Duplass, Joe Swanberg, thinking about Greta Gerwig. All start there, making these movies for like $10,000, $12,000, with like regular, HD cameras, shooting on like these little mini DV tapes. And it creates this access point for these filmmakers because these movies are getting picked up by major festivals like Sundance and South by Southwest. And what Barry Jenkins does
in 2009, all the way in 2009.
I'm telling you, what Barry Jenkins does is he injects alternative blackness into that all-white space. Because he takes that model, that mumblecore model, and he makes this film. And a lot of people, I don't know if they are familiar with the mumblecore movement. Are people familiar with the mumblecore type films? Yeah, this was like a thing, but it was all white. And it was like, usually these types of films only had maybe 2 to 4 characters in the movie at all. And usually the director was in the movie playing himself or herself. And so Barry Jenkins, what he does is he picks up on this model, he picks up on this inclination, but what he does is actually injects into the conversation this idea of alternative blackness.
And different kinds of blackness.
And different kinds of blackness. And this type of variation into this space. But he also does something interesting too, in terms of the visual style, which is really deep. He takes the color and he completely desaturates it. Like, so if you look at this image that we have on the flyer, this is how the film looked when it was shot. But then in post-production, what they actually did was went frame by frame and desaturated the color from the film. Now think about how poetic and poignant that is metaphorically, because the city of San Francisco.
Of course you would make that connection. Of course you would make that connection.
They're taking away the color. They're taking, so that the city itself, right, is taking away the color through the process of gentrification.
Speaking of the city, perfect segue by Dr. Great. That's another thing I think that strikes folks who are from the Bay Area, who are from San Francisco, is just seeing the city like it was at that time. How many folks here were in San Francisco or the Bay Area in 2009-ish, right? 2008, 2009.
Wow.
You remember this San Francisco that you saw in this movie.
Talk about it.
And it felt, I'm a transplant. I came here in 2004 from the East Coast, but watching this film just took me back. Right, and I think that's another thing that Barry Jenkins did, was the slow taking it in, giving me a long shot of Yerba Buena Gardens and the merry-go-round that I took my toddlers many years ago on to where we are right now. MoAD, and spending time at every spot in this city. It was like the city was a character.
Yes, absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit. This idea of, the city being a character. And I know you told me that Jenkins drew this style from others who've done it as well.
Right. You know, I'm glad you said that, because that's one thing that really struck me. The city is a character in the film, and the film is a love letter to the city, but it's a complicated love letter, right? Just like their relationship. It's a complicated relationship. You remember when they used to have, what's your relationship status on Facebook? It's complicated. Do they still do that? I don't even know. Everybody on Snapchat or Discord now, Instagram. But the relationship to the city itself is very complicated. Now, in terms of the cinematic movement that the film draws from, I mean, it's quite clear it's drawn from neorealism, which, you know, is associated with Italian films, is associated with African films. The French New Wave is also, it's drawn from the French New Wave movement of the 1960s, where, you know, you had filmmakers like Chabrol, Godard, who are going, you know, directly into the streets with their cameras, and they're shooting basically on location. And this is in contrast to shooting films traditionally on a soundstage, which is the traditional kind of studio model. But what Barry Jenkins does is he takes this. I mean, when we think about this, this movie was made for $13,000. He shot this film over 15 days. I think the actors got paid $1,000, right? And the cinematography is kind of placed in such a way that it feels like we're voyeurs. And the camera angles are so close. Like, when you watch the film, it's like they tight on these people. The framing is super tight. Like what we would call extreme close-ups. But what that does is it creates an emotional register of intimacy. It makes you feel connected to these characters in a way. And when we see them walking and biking through the city, it creates this very real sense of space and place. And we start to see how the city itself is a character and how it's in this kind of process of transformation. But he's showing us, right, the magic of the city, what it appeals to him as he's like newly single in the city. You know, he broke up with his white girlfriend, right? So this is the personal aspect of the film. But I think that shooting in the city in that way is what makes the film so powerful. Yes. Is that it actually situates us within that space, but it gets down to something so specific that it becomes universal.
And we also see how...
Y'all ain't hear me when I said
how
that.
Joe...
No, I'm just saying, like,
universal. Yes.
But it's the specificity that makes it universal. See, a lot of times I feel like when people think about like filmmakers or any type of artist, like in this particular moment, what happens is like, oh, I want to make something universal. I want to make something that people can relate to. But it was Toni Morrison that said, if you want to make something universal, you got to drill down into something very specific. You got to drill down into a niche. Because what happens is when you drill down into specificity, what that does is it actually allows you to tap into the human condition. And when you tap into something so specific that you are actually broaching the human condition, that in itself becomes universal.
And relatable, right?
Completely. Bars.
All right. So also through, you know, their kind of escapades around San Francisco, Jo is slowly learning about Blackness through the city. also. That's why I say it feels like the city is a character, because the character is almost teaching Jo about different aspects of being Black. And I love this scene where they're talking about, it's Sunday and what should we do? What should we do?
What do Black people do on a Sunday?
Two Black people do on a Sunday? And she says, let's go to MoMA. She doesn't say it like that, but in my head she said it like that.
Shout out to our friends at MoMA.
Shout out to our friends at MoMA. Hey! They're right across the street. And he kind of laughs and says, we're not going to MoMA. We're going to MoAD.
MoAD, mama.
MoAD, mama. MoAD,
No,
mama.
first he says, eat fried chicken.
Yes.
And
go to church.
Yeah, go to church.
Go to church and eat fried chicken. And they end up here, where we are right now in this space. The MoAD clip is amazing. It's, again, he stays for a long, beautifully long time in a space, right? He gives it its full breadth and respect. So do you want to do this before the clip or after the clip? You and MoAD.
Oh, well, yeah, no,
Yes.
I'll talk about it because that's so interesting, right? That a portion of the film is shot here.
It was her first time at MoAD. Did you believe it when she said she had no idea there was that MoAD existed?
People say that all the time. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
The horror.
The horror, exactly. But that film was the first time you had seen MoAD.
Right. And so that's what's so deep about it. I remember, like, when I encountered this film, I was living in Los Angeles, and this film was my introduction to the museum. I was like, wow, I want to go there. You know what I mean? And here we are 20 years later, having established this relationship with the museum. It's just like so eerily interesting.
Eerily?
And, yeah, it's because it's like I could not have imagined in that moment, renting that room in that house, you know what I mean, as a 20-year-old, watching this DVD, that one day I would be the inaugural cultural critic in residence at that museum. You could not have told me that, right, at all.
Yeah.
So for me, that's another reason why I think this movie is worth celebrating, because it's my first.
That's the real reason. Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
It's not just me though.
It's like a full circle moment.
It's so funny because that's autobiographical or autoethnographic is what we would call it, but like making it personal to me. And I think that what that does is it helps other people connect when you personalize. Just like one of the beauties and power of the film and its relationship to the city and this museum, it's like that's what gives it the magic that it has. That it is situated in this city, that it is encountering these real places, these real spaces like this museum, and it's
The MLK Memorial.
the MLK Memorial, Dr. King, and it's like this slice of social reality. But I want to show the clip from the film. There's the sequence where they're coming up the stairs right here, right, walking into the Equiano exhibition, and we'll just take a look at this, and then we'll talk a little bit about it.
Your laptop looks like it might be falling on the other side. Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
The first objects which saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast were the sea and the slave ship, as well as the multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow. No, I no longer doubted my fate, but I was not long suffered to indulge my grief, for I was soon put down under the decks. There I received such a salutation as I had never experienced in my life.
Yep. I mean, that's so powerful, right? I remember when I saw that moment, I was like, whoa. First of all, he completely rendered them to just silhouettes. And as a visual metaphor, what he's doing, and you see how he places them in like this quarter quadrant of the screen as a visual metaphor for the darkness of that experience that Equiano is talking about. So that is the voice of the narrator there is reading from the book about the life of Equiano, who was an African person who was kidnapped and enslaved in the UK, in Britain. And he escaped into freedom. And like, you know, he's like a British version of Frederick Douglass, right? But as he describes in this sequence, the darkness, he situates those two characters and thereby situates us in that darkness as a visual metaphor of the horrors of the Middle Passage. Mm-hmm. And I feel like by squeezing them into the frame like that, it's accentuating, because they're very close together. You see how close they are? Even in this shot, right? How close they are. It's expressing, I think, like the relational intimacy. They're at this museum trying to find their way to a connection together. Because again, it's complicated. But this sequence, when I watched it, I was going like, what just happened? Did he just complete, first of all, walking in silence through the museum, which I think is like, is that like a requirement in museums? Like, it's like a library, you just gotta be quiet. Is that it?
I think so.
It's like a reverence that you're supposed to have for the space.
Right, yes.
So I'm talking too loud right now? But the silence, I think, prepares us for the gravity of that moment.
Yeah.
Because when you just drop us into Equiano, I'm talking about totally out of the blue, it gives, I think it adds this layer of social depth to the film that just blew me away. I remember watching that going like, whoa. He drops us into this darkness, crouched together as like a visual metaphor to embody what it would have been like and what it would have looked like for those people in the hull of those ships who were being forcibly transported to an alien world where they were no longer the subjects of their experience in Africa, but they became the objects of Western oppression.
And being in that space that they were in, who has been in that space back in the day at MoAD, at that exhibit downstairs with the door of no return?
Wow.
And sitting in that space in the dark and listening to the narratives of slaves. I remember that. We had that experience.
What was it like?
It was profound. I love the shot that Barry Jenkins shot, because it tells the exact feeling that we were feeling as we were sitting in there, right? You're taking it in, you are in horror, you are in awe, you are thinking so many things in your head as you sit there. You know, I came out from a whole world into this, and I'm about to go out back into my whole world, but these people did not, right? And so I'm hoping for that exhibit to come back one day. I thought it was a permanent exhibit. Maybe it was gone with COVID, or before that, perhaps, yeah, before. But that also brings me to something else, which you touched upon, which is this idea of we are witnessing their romance develop, or the relationship develop amidst these uncomfortable truths and realities, and him kind of teaching her about like she's getting a Black history lesson, right?
She giving him one too.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, this idea that even these moments, these tense moments, are bringing them together, right? And so that leads me to ask you about kind of the romance in this film, and this idea of you have a thing that you said to me as well. I don't want to give everything away here, but you said something like the film doesn't separate the romantic story, right, from the city, right, from the tension, from it's all moving together. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look at that sequence, when they come out of that darkness moment, they're closer together, physically. They're physically closer together, and what that and they're in silence. And so I feel like that silence and that kind of physical proximity, that closeness, it speaks to not only the history and the brutality that you mentioned, but in a way I feel like that brings them together, being in the museum. And then what that does is it allows the film and Barry Jenkins not to divorce the romantic elements of the movie from the social reality of the film itself. And San Francisco as a city, you know, and the transgressions of the city and the city in transformation is also wedded to, you like how I'm using them words, divorced and wedded? You see how, you know what I'm saying? Romance. And see, it's all connected to this idea of intimacy. But the type of relational intimacy that I think is very complicated. And so the film doesn't choose to separate that, and it doesn't choose to answer those questions either. Because, I mean, she clearly has a boyfriend. When he says to her, he like, who pay rent here? Right? And then she says, nobody. And then he go, okay then, well, who pay the mortgage here?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And she says, my boyfriend. And she says, well, you got a boyfriend? What does he do? Oh, he a curator. Well, why ain't got no damn art on the walls? Which is just...
And then he draws those stick figures or whatever.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
And so, you know, for me, what this suggests is, again, an emotional register of connecting these two people, but not separating the driving force, which is the space and the place that they find themselves in. Mm-hmm. And the complicated nature of their interactions also reflects the complicated nature of their interactions with the city itself.
Mm-hmm. And then, as you know, throughout the film, we see how uncomfortable Jo is with Micah whenever he brings up, you know, Blackness or identity. Mm. And it culminates in this moment where she asks Micah, you know, why you talk about race all the time, right? Like, why is race so central to your identifying yourself? Why do we have to be talking about this? Let's go dancing.
Right. Right. Like, I don't want to have this conversation.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting to me.
I must say, I hear some of this sometimes nowadays.
What?
This idea of why do we have to talk about race all the time? Why is it all black all the time? Why, can we speak through different lenses than blackness? Is there a saturation now about talking about issues through the lens of blackness? I hear that sometimes. We have lots of feedback, let's say, to our shows on the radio. And so I don't know who they're from, but that's something that we hear,
I believe that. I believe it. I wanted to ask you though, like, I want to know how you felt about the romantic interactions, from a woman perspective. Like, you're watching this film, you see the complications, you see the romantic elements. Like, how do you interpret those things? How do you feel or relate to that experience with the film?
I mean, personally, I don't know about personally, but but this idea of infusing the relationship with complexity is just so real. It's so real because that's life. That is how it is. There is no relationship that's perfect. There is no, goo-goo eyes and they fall in love and happily ever after without complications and life happening, right? And so to me, that's one reason why I loved this film. It's relatability, right? When you see two people in a romance and they're slowly kind of getting to like each other, it's never perfect. I don't think, unless somebody out there has a perfect relationship. But it's real, and especially this idea of different kinds of black falling for each other, right? The idea of black is not a monolith, that there are different classes of black people, different backgrounds. I am a daughter of African immigrants, right? Like, I came to this country when I was 8 months old. I am a kind of black, you're a kind of black, we're all different kinds of black, but society doesn't see us like that. Society sees us as a monolith. And this film, to me, just kind of breaks that up, right? Like, you're seeing two different kinds of two black people who have different life experiences. Surprise, we have different life. You know what I mean?
Right.
Of course, people have different life experiences, and so it was just real. I believed it. I believed that the pace of their romance as well. At the beginning, I was wondering. I was just like, Jo is really quiet. How is this romance gonna, bud in this 1 hour and 15, 20 minutes? Yeah, but that is life. And that's what you were talking about in terms of the city and it being, a real representation. This was a representation of a first day in love.
What you just said, it made me think about two words, and they are all like juxtaposed in a way. It's like beauty and ugliness. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's what the film in many instances captures really well, this balance between beauty and ugliness. What do I mean by that? Well, when the movie first starts, they don't even know each other's name. Can I keep it real with y'all? We gonna really have a conversation? Can we just, that's not a way, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's not the ideal set of, that's why I make the distinction between love and romance. Right? This is a romantic film. This is not a love story. You feel me? They're having a romance. And they're trying to figure that out. They're trying to navigate their way through an experience. I mean, this is a one-night stand. She says that in the movie, right at the garden before they get on the carousel.
Yeah.
She says, like, you know, this is a one-night stand, right?
Doesn't look like it to me.
You know, and he like, yeah, it's only been one night. That's true, but you know, ellipsis, you know, ... And what he's trying to do is establish something more meaningful. But for me, you know, that distinction, making that distinction between love and romance is very critical. Because there is a such thing as black love. That's why I called this program Black Is, Black Ain't. Right? Not only as an homage to the documentarian Marlon Riggs, who directed a documentary in 1995 called Black Is, Black Ain't. A brilliant documentary. Anybody seen that one? Yeah, come on now. I see you shining on it. But that element, for me, is very important because that's the ugly part about it. They're trying to find the beauty in something. Because when you don't even know the person's name, and then when they're getting the coffee, he said, okay, hey, I'm Micah. She talking about, I'm Angela. Come on, man, we're not even being real. We're not even being real. So it's not a love thing. It's a romance. And they're trying to navigate through that ugly part of it. We just had a one night stand. We trying to get to, you know, we trying to get to the romance. And if it wasn't for her leaving that wallet in the cab, no, it was a cab, it wasn't Uber. That's why I said this is a pre-Uber, because that would have been an Uber. You know what I'm saying? Like, that today, that would have been an Uber. Like, oh, let's get an Uber. I'm going to call it Uber or a Lyft. And now I wanted to ask you real quick, like, was that, like, when he was tracking her down, was that weird? Was that kind of like, would we be like, that's stalkerish? He got on MySpace. He kind of, like, did the thing, you know, because, like, I just want to know, was that a weird thing? Or was that cool?
I feel like people will do that. I feel like people will go and they will search for you. If they're interested in you, they're going to go on. My age goes on Facebook still. But, you know, they go on Instagram. They look for each other. He was intentional.
No, he was. It's interesting because I think it's generational, too. Because, like, when I taught at Spelman College down in Atlanta years ago, and, you know, I showed Love Jones in the film, in the class. And those sisters did not like that movie. They was like, what is this? And they was like, the part where Darius finds her address similarly and tries to track her down, they felt like, yo, this is low-key stalkerish. And I was like, yo, the times have changed, haven't they? You know, because, you know, in the 90s, people was like, that was romantic. They was like, well, Dr. Gray, like, what was it like in 1997? Like, what was acceptable back in 97? Yeah. It's like, well, but that's I think it's, you know what I'm saying? It's deep. Like, it's like when we talk about the 60s, right? It's like, 97 was a weird time. Dang, really? But no, I think that's the complicated aspect of it. That's the beauty, that's the ugliness, that's the complications, that's the complexity, that's the nuance. Because yeah, the relational element is a little bit off, but they're trying to find the beauty in that. I think that's pretty cool.
Yep.
You want to show that clip?
Yeah, so this is the moment where she asks Micah, you know, why do we have to talk about race all the time?
Right. Check this out.
First black woman to ride a fixed-gear bike through the marina. Hell, you probably the first black woman in the marina. Hey, you ever think about how black folks are only 7% of the city?
You have a real issue with race, you know that? obviously, but I'm serious, and this ain't the weed talking. You ever think about how we're only 7% of this city?
You're not 7%, you're Micah.
You know what I mean? Like, if black folks are 7% of this city, and then you take whatever 1 or 2% considers itself like punk or indie or folk or, just not what you see on BET, like, you ever realize just how few of us there really are?
No.
I mean, check it. You might go to a show, and for every, 300 people, there's probably one black person. They damn near guaranteed to have their arm around somebody white. I'm just saying. All right, check it. How do you define yourself?
Excuse me?
Like, how do you define yourself? If you had to describe, your idea of how you see the world, like, how would you do it in one word?
That makes no sense. People aren't that simple. How can you define yourself in one word?
Easy. Me, I'm a black man. That's how I see the world. That's how the world sees me. But if I have to choose one, I'm black before I'm a man. So therefore, I am black.
I don't see it that way.
Why not?
That's your problem. You feel you have to define everybody. You limit them to the point where they're just a definition and not people.
How you figure?
You just said it. You went from I am Micah to I am black.
I'm not?
Yes, but you're everything else too.
That's not how society sees it.
Well, who gives a shit about what society thinks? I don't want to talk anymore. Let's do something.
What you want to do?
I want to dance.
Right, I want to dance.
She does not want to be in this uncomfortable conversation that makes her uncomfortable. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, usually when somebody start out a sentence, it's not the weed talking. That means it's probably the weed talking. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you have to add that as a preface to what you're about to say, yeah, that part. But, it's interesting, right? 7% of the city. What is it now? 2%? What is it?
It's like 3.5 or
3.5%.
Yep, 3.5.
Right? So that's changed over time.
In 1970, it was 13%.
Man, this film, and I wanted to show a clip of this, but, time. This film is really, I feel like, in conversation with another film called Take This Hammer, a documentary starring James Baldwin. Anybody seen this one? Like right here, yeah. James Baldwin comes to the city of San Francisco as like a witness, to bear witness, which is what Baldwin does. But there's these moments in the film where they're talking about the people, a documentary, the people who he's interviewing are basically talking about the complicated relationship that black people have with the city. Mm-hmm. And, this one brother says, San Francisco. Well, I'm going to tell you about San Francisco. You think that down in Montgomery, Alabama, they got it bad with them dogs. They might be killing you with them dogs. And, but here in the city, they kill you with the pen and the paper. And I was just like, dag. And I feel like, in a way, these two films are like markers for that kind of rendering of or extracting of blackness from the physical space of the city. Because like the Fillmore was like predominantly black.
It was.
But then it wasn't. And so to your point about why we gotta always talk about race. Look, don't drink that Kool-Aid. Don't let nobody tell you that, Because that's the thalidomide drug, right? That's what they wanted us to drink after the election of Obama. Like, you know, the hasty, oh, this is the post-racial. We're post-racial now. Right? Drink that Kool-Aid. We're post-racial now. Everything is okay. Meanwhile, the Tea Party burning crosses in your yard. So the issue of race in America is the fundamental conundrum of this country. And it is the most pressing social issue of the day. And it always will be, in my opinion.
Not according to Joe.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why I'm making this point now, right? Joe, you hear me? Because anybody who knows anything about, you know, basic psychology, right? In order to move forward from a trauma, the first thing you have to do is acknowledge it. Right? And then once you acknowledge it, then we got to talk about it. Shout out to anybody who go to get some therapy. You know what I mean? Shout out to the people who believe in therapy. And what I'm suggesting is that after the Emancipation Proclamation, there was no therapy that black people were allowed to experience, nor the white counterparts who didn't see these human beings as human beings. So how we gonna not have a conversation about race when we dealing with the remnants of it every single day, transgenerationally? And so what I'm suggesting
today, it's taking different book banning in
Talk about it.
2023.
Talk about it.
I have a child in college right now and one who is a senior in high school. So we you know, we're blessed to be, I guess, in this Bay Area, in this California, but this conversation about what these kids coming up, this generation Alpha, is going to be studying around this country, and what they will not be taking, and what they will not be. It's an urgent issue, and so the whole, why do we talk about being black all the time? Why do we talk about these issues all the time? Life will show us why. And reality will come up and show us why we need to keep talking about race and identity, and that this will never go away. It will pop up every 4 years, even before every 4 years. But yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that I think about all the time. Is like, where is this going? If we're going to open a social studies book and not see the full story of enslaved people and how they were brought to this country and the whole full history, because someone decided that their child will feel bad when they read that their ancestors, you know, what their ancestors did. And so there is no time to not talk about any of this, I think. So, but I was saying that I've heard lots of people who talk like Joe. You know, we're tired of it. Why we got to talk about this all the time? And we have to have these conversations every single time. Every single time.
Yeah, I don't see, it's inescapable, right? It's the lifeblood in a way of this nation. And that is not, so listen, when people say like, don't talk about it, I think that's like a psych job. You know, like I think that's like some type of disillusionment that is an attempt to ignore the ultimate reality. And the deal is that like, when I'm in certain spaces, I can't not talk about it. It's like Cornel West says that there are certain things that black people in America cannot not know. Right? You feel what I'm saying? Certain things that you cannot not know. In other words, it's certain things you gotta know in order to survive this human condition existing while being black in this country. And so one thing that I think is quite fascinating is that in that particular sequence, Jo is basically saying, and Elizabeth, you brought this up yesterday, she was saying like, why do you care what society thinks? But doesn't it seem like Micah's character is the one who wouldn't care what society thinks, and Jo's character would be the one who would care about society thinks? So that interchange, that exchange of kind of positionality is really interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, but there's also this underlying issue that you can't help but wonder. Is Jo avoiding conversations about race because her boyfriend is white? It comes to mind. It comes to mind. But then, you start to remember. I know many people who are in interracial marriages. Even our good friend of the station, W. Kamau Bell from Oakland. He's very much married to a white woman. He's very outspoken about Black issues, and so that if that was a reason, that doesn't make sense. But in the context of this film, that's what I was feeling, as if she. How do I say this in a palatable way?
Take your time, as they say. Take your time. Let them use you.
As if there was a guilt. There was a feeling of, I shouldn't be talking about these issues because I didn't choose a Black man. I don't know. There's something there that Barry Jenkins wanted us to feel. Right. I think that I felt was the reason why she didn't want to talk about any of these things. And it's not just because of her, she's a professional. She's of a certain class. I think it's because of her relationship. Wow. I don't know.
No, it's deep because, like I said, the film is very personal to Barry Jenkins because he is coming out like the impetus for him to write this film was the ending of his first interracial relationship. See, I said first.
See, you left that nugget.
You see, I ain't wanting to gossip, so you ain't heard that from me. You understand? Shoot. No, but that's the reality. And then he's in San Francisco actually dealing with it. So in a way, like, is it autobiographical? Semi. He's not Micah, but he's putting his feelings in the mouth of Micah, right? His experiences. And Jo becomes like this composite character of like different Black women who he would have liked to have dated, but only date white boys. Come on, man, we gonna have a conversation or what? Because I'm just trying, let me know. Because I'm gonna keep it, And so.
At the same time, what is never resolved is her discovery on the MySpace of his former white girlfriend. She never says anything about it until the end of the film. I was just waiting for the moment when she was gonna bring it up, and she doesn't bring it up. And Barry Jenkins, ooh.
Yeah, he trying to let himself off the hook. No, that's what I'm saying. So interesting. I would ask him that part because there's a moment where she clearly should say it.
Yes.
You know which part it is? Y'all know which part it is? After they leave the club, where they're walking down the street, they're fighting. Yeah, they done had 2 tacos, right? One spicy, one mild. And he goes to her. Why you gotta date somebody white?
Like you, yeah.
And I'm thinking the audacity of this Negro, right?
I thought that was the moment.
You were just with a white girl 20 minutes ago. What are we talking about? But that to me is the beauty and the ugliness, the complexity, right? That's why it's not about love, it's about romance. And it's about, is it hypocrisy? I don't know. It's complicated is what it is. And we shouldn't shy away from that because the reality of it is everything is not black and white. You saw how I did that?
Yeah.
But even the movie itself is not even black and white. It's like desaturated, so it's a little bit of color there, but not a lot. But to the point about healing really quick, why do we got to talk about race all the time, et cetera, et cetera? It's not personal. It's not personal. And what I mean by that, I mean that to like white folks. It's not personal. It's like I'm not personally mad at you. Like, it's the system of inequality that is perpetuated and the institutional structures that continue to maintain the status quo. That's what I'm upset about. Now, if we can start to have a real conversation, it's just like Malcolm X said, if somebody stick a knife in your back and remove it, they stick a knife in your back 8 inches and pull it out 2 inches, that's not really healing. He said, you got to remove the whole knife and start to heal the wound. You got to patch it up. He said, but America don't even want to admit that the knife is there in the first place. And that's the issue. We have to have these conversations that can be deemed uncomfortable in order to start to make the type of progress that will bring us together where we can actually honor our commonalities and celebrate our differences.
Our last clip is going to reflect something that's similar to what we were talking about in terms of the dwindling number of Black people in the city of San Francisco, and that's gentrification is very central to this film. And so there's a clip, but you know, I just wanted to say that Barry Jenkins here, to me, sometimes I thought I was watching a documentary, and so and I would have to remind myself that no, this is a fictional story, and then you'd get these clips, and you'd feel like you were in they're moments of learning, and one of them was this clip that we're gonna see, where they're walking down the street in the Castro, and they happen by a town hall meeting that's going on about housing and rent control.
Right. Let's check it out.
And I think, unfortunately, that's what happened to the Castro. As the upscale people moved in, the attitudes became, more of the attitudes of the upper class. There is this sense in this town that we are becoming a city of the very rich and the very poor. We all know people have been pushed out at an alarming rate. I mean, I would say thousands and thousands of people have been pushed out in the last 12 years from mainly the eastern side of the city where all the renters are.
The mayor in this last election campaign and all the people opposing him never used the words rent control at all. There were 9 or 10 other people opposing the mayor. None of them mentioned it in a description of what they believed and what they're interested in. The mayor, who's been in office for how many years now, has never used the words rent control. So they are trying to make this into something that no one can put their fingers on. It's just going to happen.
They're already building market rate condos in Bayview, and you know that they're not going to have market rate condos next to projects. You know what's going to go, and it ain't going to be the market rate condos. We're already seeing that Bayview is going to go the way the Fillmore did, and they're going to gentrify the neighborhood and push out the people who are living there now and bring in more upscale people.
Well, from when the Fillmore and the Western Addition and all that gentrification happened, we're still feeling those effects. And then anyone who's gone through the dot-com boom knows that it looks good now in comparison, because then people literally were renting out closets. Literally renting out closets for like $600 to $800.
They still are.
Is there any options for people to make? I mean, there's no affordable housing for actual poor people.
Move to the East Bay.
Which is what's happening. I live in Berkeley and Oakland, and that has been the tale of the last 10 years. And unfortunately, a lot of us from the East Bay are getting pushed out by people who've been pushed out of San Francisco.
There's a ballot initiative that supposedly is about eminent domain issues, but actually will repeal rent control throughout the state. So San Francisco could lose rent control next June. Think of over 350,000 apartments suddenly losing rent control in San Francisco, and all the people that could get displaced potentially by something like that. As far as I'm concerned, it's the end of the whole east side of San Francisco. The whole east side will just gentrify overnight, and all of the great things that we love about San Francisco would be gone overnight.
And that's kind of what happened.
I was going to ask, so what was the result of that conversation? Like, I wanted to talk to you about that because I think that's interesting. And you see how, like, immediately after they come out of that sequence, again, they're brought closer together. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of push through there. That's another visual metaphor. But I was really interested in what you thought about the results of what they were describing in that meeting.
First of all, can I ask you, do we know if that was a real meeting going on? Or were they were not acting, right?
No, that was completely real. That's what in film, like in film production, we call the happy accident, right? Where you, something happens, you stumble upon something, whether that be a location, whether that be a conversation, a real moment, something that you did not intend as the filmmaker, as the director or producer, that you didn't intend to happens, and it's magical. Yep. It's just called, like in film, we call that the happy accident. Like, we don't know, and you're always looking for those types of moments as a director. You're trying to, you can't control it, obviously, that's what makes it an accident, but that completely was real, and they stumbled upon that location, and they just asked the people, do you mind if we film this kind of town hall meeting while you guys are in here? And they were like, sure.
So back to the journalism around this time. At our station, in our newsroom, we did a lot of the coverage of what they're talking about right now. So rent control stayed, but that was no match for big tech. And the tech boom that happened after this film, I think during this film, but definitely exacerbated after this film. Big tech completely changed the rental landscape. All these big companies were moving in, and the city was creating space for them. The city needed money, and so the city welcomed the high taxes that these businesses would pay, and that's when we saw rents just skyrocket, right? And so when we talk about people being priced out, all this time, that's what's been happening from that time. And so I remember at that time, sending our reporters out to do stories about people who were newly unhoused. And that's, it was a difficult time. I remember going and interviewing just to a park where many unhoused people were just staying and interviewing them. They all had stories about, just not being able to afford rent anymore in this city and not knowing what to do. And that was increasing, like to the extent that we had to create a position to report on homelessness. Like, that's when we really started in 2010-ish, I think. 2010, 2011 is when we really started to see this increase in homelessness. And for us as reporters and journalists, we have to report on it. We had to, go to the city and kind of ask what was going on in terms of what is being done to help folks stay in this city. Because at that time also, like they were saying, people went out to Oakland. And then the people in Oakland started getting priced out and moving to Vallejo. And so, this is very poignant because this was kind of the beginning of all of it.
So how did that affect the rent control? So if they increase, I thought rent control meant your rent stay the same. How can they increase the rent?
They limit it by certain percentages, right? Like, I think the most recent thing in 2013 was 3.5%. That's how much you're allowed to increase your rent by. But again, it was no match. It was no match for, heavy evictions. The tech money was just too good. The fires? For sure. Yes, definitely. The fires as well. So, yeah, it was not a pretty time to be reporting or to be a journalist. It It was, as our brothers and sisters on the right would say, the beginning of the decline of San Francisco.
You know, that's hilarious.
It's problematic in and of itself. But.
It is. But, you know, it makes me think, because again, going back to Toni Morrison and the specificity versus the universality, what makes this film to me so interesting is how it's so specific to San Francisco, yet if you step back, it's almost operating as a microcosm of urban America.
The same happened in Brooklyn.
That's what, you know where I'm going.
Same,
like, that's exactly what I'm thinking about. Like, at the time when I was at NYU, basically in my PhD program, I was living in Brooklyn, and then I would take, you know, the B train, you know, right to the Village. But when I feel like I was living in Brooklyn I got the last piece of the cultural moment of Blackness that was being squeezed out like a vice, because you started to see the high rises become erected. And I was thinking about this one thing. There was this event every year, and if anybody's ever been, shout out Dance Africa. Dance Africa in Brooklyn is like, it's just like heaven for black people. It's like, man, in Brooklyn, I'm talking about the music, the food, the culture. It's like this huge festival, but it was like massive in terms of its scope and scale and size. And yet, I was at NYU for 4 years doing my program, and each year that festival got smaller and smaller. Now, this festival had been here for 50, 60 years. And so what I'm suggesting is that when you drill down into something specific, like Jenkins did with this film in terms of San Francisco, you reach something that taps into the core of the human condition. And then we also start to see how that functions in a way to speak to the broader kind of cultural issues that are at play in America. And so the people who are getting priced out of certain neighborhoods in Brooklyn, like Fort Greene or Clinton Hill, they were moving to Bushwick, because that's where the artists were, right? And the artists create the heat. But then at the same time, now Williamsburg, all these types of things happen, the same thing in Brooklyn. Now, everybody, all the artists who were in Brooklyn, know where they live now? Baltimore. Baltimore. There's a whole movement. I write about this a little bit in the book, but there's this whole new black bohemian art independent movement that's taking place in Baltimore right now as a result of this type of action taking place in Brooklyn.
It is 8:09.
Yes.
Time has flown by.
Yes.
I know we're supposed to wrap up, but if you can wrap up for us, Dr. Great, there's 2 points that we wanted to talk about, but I don't know if time will allow us. And maybe they can be actually merged into one. This idea of the legacy of this film and community preservation in cinema, and what this film means in terms of Black cinema.
Yeah. This is a special moment, a special film. And I feel like it's a document that is like a time capsule now. And sometimes when you make a film, you know, as a filmmaker, sometimes when you make a film, you ask certain questions about, well, should I include this or that in the film because it might date the film to a specific time or wed the film to a specific time. But I think like that's something that really works in this film in a way that after rewatching it again, it gives you this experience of what it was like to be alive during that time. I'm talking about, it's so interesting because, pardon me, to me, this film is like this social document, but it's also depicting for the first time this kind of subculture of Blackness. And even though it didn't get this mainstream recognition like Moonlight or, Beale Street or Underground Railroad or any of the other films that Jenkins has done, it is a very impactful film because it allows for us to get a glimpse into this alternative world where Black people are at the center of the narrative. And the question, of what it means to be Black, and it pushes beyond the confines and the limitations of what the dominant culture would like for us to think Blackness is, and what Black ain't. And so for me, this film speaks directly to that. It points us to a moment where, again, like I said, a pre-Obama America, pre-pandemic. There's so many things, after watching this film now, I'm going wow, that was a completely different time. Mm-hmm. And yet, the issues remain. And so, one of the major takeaways is that there is not one way to identify as Black, but there are a multiplicity of expressions of Blackness that are emerging, and that they all deserve a moment in the sun. We all deserve the opportunity to shine. There is not one specific, okay, this is the Black community, this is the Black experience. No, there are Black communities. There are Black experiences. And they're all valid, like yours. Like mine, like yours, like yours, like yours, you see what I'm saying? And so for me, looking back at this film, the magic of it is its relationship to the city and how these two characters are troubled and maneuver through the confines of it. But it's like the friction of what it means to encounter these issues, and at the same time, they're laughing. Mm-hmm. They have moments of joy. I love the part where they go to the club, and they're if this was a Hollywood film, they would have went to the club, and that would have been from the windows to the wall to the
When they were saying, "Are we going to the white club or the black club?" I thought they were gonna choose the. So unexpected.
No, and that's that's what makes this film a masterpiece. It totally goes against the grain. Mm-hmm. And it's totally and now again, that was, I think, a very strategic move on the part of Jenkins, because he knew who he was going to play this movie for. Right? So again, it's a strategy as a filmmaker, it's who is the audience that you want to receive this movie? Now, that is not to say that he didn't desire for us to see this film, but he also knew that this was the type of vibe that would get them into South by Southwest. Would get them in. No, I'm telling you.
It's true.
I'm telling you. So this little indie rock moment. But for me, I think the speaking to that multiplicity, and one of the real takeaways is within that kind of Black bohemia, this indie Black scene, there's also another version of that, where there's this pro-Black kind of indie scene where Black power is the philosophy, and they not, they won't date outside their race, and that still exists too. Mm-hmm. But I think the beauty of it is that what we're able to see from the film is that variation and that variety and that what it means to be alive in that moment and how that specifically has changed over time.
I was about to say, Dr. Barry Jenkins, thank you very much. Oh my goodness, almost. Artel Great, all right. Yes. It's your program. Do we have time? We would love some engagement. If anybody has a question for Dr. Great, the film scholar, or a comment about the film.
Yeah, and also from our live stream, our online audience, if there are any questions. Yeah, shout out to everybody watching online.
We do just have a few minutes first.
Yeah, it's cool. So if you have a question, feel free to type it into the chat. Yep.
So this is more of a statement than a question. I'll try to really summarize. But I saw this film when I used to live in Minneapolis. That's where I was born and raised. I'm Midwestern. Micah is me. He and I are the same. Went through, relationships, whatever, with white people, but then emerged from that experience with some type of vent or frustration that was inside, and it came out as identity, like really realizing the beauty of Blackness and wanting to embrace what we missed out on for so long. And so I feel that with Micah, where he's trying to recapture moments, reclaim his time, so to speak. So, yeah, just wanted to share that.
No, I appreciate you sharing that too. That was very beautiful and personal, and I think that connection, because most people wouldn't think that you would identify with that particular character, right? It's go, well, but why not? So thank you for sharing that.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm so excited. I love this movie so much, and every time I mention it, nobody knows what I'm talking about, whatever. Anyway, so I'm like, here's the DVD. But I was here at the premiere showing in San Francisco. It was over at the, it used to be the Sundance Theater in the Embarcadero, and Barry Jenkins was there, and he had just got out, his film school, and he was like, I did it for this much money, and people were like, how? And then that's why partially why the shots are so tight is because he's broke student, and he couldn't get the right permits to show strangers on the streets. My comment is one of the things I think is really interesting in advancing our time and watching them on the bikes, that's such a very specific San Francisco hipster thing from that moment, is fixed gear bikes that made no damn sense in the city with hills. But they're riding, one of the when they first decide to leave the house together, right, to hang out for the day, they're riding side by side in the middle of the street. And you don't see people do that really anymore. And now it was we have our raised bike paths. It's very safe, mostly for white people who need to commute to work that way, which is really great. We love safety on bikes, okay? But there was this accessibility of taking over the whole street and taking over that space. I'm gonna I gotta wiggle off these gears. I gotta, And so I think it's also a comment about the accessibility to climate change. And there's this other teachable aspect of this around Black people engaging with climate change, and we were doing that, in ways that were very cool as well, right? And so that was just my comment. Thank you.
No, I love that. I love that comment, and that to me, you used the word hipster. That to me is it identifies, because again, if you just looked only at dominant cinema, Hollywood cinema, where that's at? Black hipsters, alternative Blackness, that doesn't exist. And what I think the film does, and you spoke to that a little bit about the bikes, but that's something that's so, would be considered so kind of, it's such a small detail, but it's really monumental, because what it does is it speaks to the beauty of everydayness. Right? Finding, that's what another key takeaway is, finding beauty in the ordinariness of our everyday lives. Yeah, we don't have to be saints. We don't have to be monsters. We can find beauty in the ordinariness of our everyday lives. So thank you for that.
I got a question. I guess it's about cinematography. You talked earlier about how the color was all washed out for most of this film. I think probably everybody noticed, at the beginning and through a lot of it, you saw shades of pink here and there. And I saw something in the clip you played of the community meeting that I didn't notice when I watched this film yesterday, which is the guy leading that meeting is wearing a green T-shirt. And you can really see that green. Everybody else at that meeting is black and white. And the only other color I really remember seeing in the movie is I think it's the final scene when Jo leaves and rides away on her bike in the deli across the street from the apartment up on Geary Street. It's got a blue awning, and it's really bright. It's like the brightest color I remember seeing in the whole film. And I guess I'm not a film analyst or a critic. I don't really know. But do you think he was trying to symbolize something in particular with those three colors in those three places, or is it just like a coincidence? Like that's how the frames were washing on the day that they did those frames, or do you know?
I don't know, but I love that question. And what I do know and I can speak to is the intentionality that went into. So they were editing the film as they were shooting it, which again was another kind of element of the mumblecore movement. But when they got to the final post color correction, they went through every shot and they desaturated it. So it is. So a lot of people say, well, the movie is black and white. Well, Barry describes it as pink. He describes the whole film as pink. So what he was going for was that. Like, that was the idea. And it wasn't like, because in terms of cinematography, that's always like the kind of push and pull between the director and the cinematographer. Like, okay, how are we going to color this film in the end? And a lot of times what you should do, and they were probably limited in what they could do in camera with like an HVX 200, shooting on mini DV. But like now you can adjust some of those registers in the camera a lot more freely than you would have been able to do at that time. But how he describes it, he describes the whole film as pink.
Okay, our last question here.
I guess this is a question for both of you about Jo and Micah's positionings as a Black San Francisco native, born and raised, right? Someone who sees himself as like not indigenous to the land, but indigenous to the city. I think that's how Savannah Shange talks about Blackness in San Francisco. And then Jo's positioning as like a transplant who has like an ambiguous relationship to housing with a white partner.
What was the question, though?
Like, just what do you think of how they navigate romance in those positions?
Oh, okay. Copy that. Yeah. No, Hana?
How they navigate romance. I think she's very cautious, right? I remember when I came to San Francisco, I was quiet a lot. I wanted to listen and learn and understand, and I was kind of, cautious a little bit and uncomfortable at times. And, Micah represents to me the person who's just comfortable, right? Like, this is where I know this place, this is me. And she was just very kind of like, she's like tiptoeing around the Bay Area. It felt like she was comfortable in her little Oakland home, but, it's almost like she's just getting to know San Francisco. That to me was interesting. Like, she's almost like hesitant, and that's like her character in the film as well. She's like uncomfortable and hesitant, and he's just like, right, like just like very, very comfortable. And navigating that romance like that, again, to me, it was just real. It's not perfect. It is complicated, and it was messy, and that's true. That is very true. That happens.
You're absolutely right. And, one of the things to speak to that question, Barry wrote that character not with her in mind. He cast her after he wrote that character, and then they found Wyatt Cenac like doing stand-up in LA. And then what ended up happening was they reached out to him. This was before he was on The Daily Show. They reached out to him. He auditioned, but he had Tracy first, who plays Jo. He had cast her first. And they were almost at the point ready to start the production of the film when they found the Micah character. And Barry thought Micah was so interesting that he changed some of the character for him, because that wasn't how his character was written. And in terms of the Jo character, what her preparation he had Barry had her do so much preparation. He said he wrote her like a 5-page packet on her character because there was so much subtext and so much underneath the surface of her character, which is why she's so silent. He wanted to give her all of these nuances to try to play the interiority of this character. And that's kind of the beauty of the film. So when you see that sequence where, she's in the marina where her boyfriend owns this, townhouse. But then when they get to Micah's apartment in the Mission District, he has the poster, the Lies poster on his wall. And he says, "Are you familiar with that?" And she's like, "No, not really," right? And I think that sets up this particular juxtaposition between these two characters that allows them to try to find intimacy, but they can never really find that because there's this barrier that's always already present.
So do you think in the end they will, in your imagination, will they find their ways to each other and will this romance happen?
No. No. That's why I love the ambivalence of the ending.
Yep.
I love the ambivalence of the ending where it's like this tracking shot where we go around the kind of like tiny closet-like apartment and then we go into the window and down the fire escape and we see her biking off and that's it. I loved how he ended that. I was like, now how dope is that? It's totally like European art film, but it's totally open-ended. It's totally ambiguous. Like, yeah, he knows where I live, but keep in mind, like they did have like that fight. And she wanted to go home then.
Yep.
So I think that's it.
I don't.
Ooh.
I don't.
That's the beauty of it.
Yeah, I think he ran after her.
He went back.
Yeah.
He went back. He know where she live at.
Yeah.
We don't know when that curator boyfriend coming back. You can't forget about that one.
Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody watching online. Appreciate you.